It is 170,000 years ago, Africa. A young human crouches over the body of a dead animal. Not to eat it. Not this time. Something else is happening in that brain, something that has never happened before in the history of life on Earth. That human is looking at the skin and thinking about wearing it. That single moment, that one strange cognitive leap, would eventually determine whether our species lived or died, not metaphorically, literally. Without animal skin, Homo sapiens would almost certainly never have left Africa. Without animal skin, the Ice Age would have ended us. The cold parts of the world would have remained forever out of reach. Without animal skin, there would be no Europe, no Asia, no Americas, no civilization as we know it. This is the story of how a piece of dead animal became the most important technology our species ever invented. And it starts not with a genius, not with a king, not with a moment of divine inspiration. It starts with a problem, a very specific, very dangerous, very cold problem. Let's go. First, understand what human skin actually is, and what it is not. Homo sapiens is one of the most physically vulnerable large mammals that has ever existed. We have no thick fur, no natural insulation, no built-in protection from cold. Most large mammals can survive temperatures well below freezing because their bodies came with the equipment. We did not. Our ancestors evolved on the warm African savanna. For hundreds of thousands of years, the temperature was fine. The sun was warm. The nights were cool, but survivable. The human body adapted to that environment. Thin skin, minimal body hair, massive sweat gland coverage for cooling in the heat. Everything about the human body says, I was designed for warmth, not for cold, not for winter, not for ice. And then the climate changed. As it always does. As it always has. Around 100,000 years ago, the Earth entered a period of significant climate instability. Temperatures dropped in many regions. Environment shifted. The comfortable, warm world that had cradled human evolution for so long began to become less comfortable and less warm. And our ancestors faced a choice that was not really a choice at all. Adapt or disappear. They adapted, but not through biological evolution, not through growing fur or thickening their skin. They adapted through something that had never been done before in the history of life. They adapted through technology, specifically through wearing someone else's skin. Now here is the first thing most people do not know about early animal skin use. The earliest use of animal skins was almost certainly not about cold. We know this because the genetic evidence places clothing around 170,000 years ago in Africa. And Africa, 170,000 years ago, was warm. This is the same discovery we discussed before. Lice evolution telling us when clothing began. But here is what is new in the story. What started as protection from insects and a social signal in warm Africa became something else entirely as humans moved. As populations began pushing into new territories, north, east, into cooler highlands toward the coast, The animal skin went with them. And in those cooler places, it stopped being optional. It became survival. The transformation from decorative draping to life-saving insulation is one of the most important transitions in human history. And it happened gradually, almost invisibly. One generation drapes a skin loosely over their shoulders on a cold night. A slightly warmer night for this generation. The next generation learns from watching. They drape the skin more deliberately. They choose thicker skins. They notice which animals offer better warmth. The generation after that begins to tie the skin, to secure it, to keep it on the body more effectively. Across hundreds of generations, this gradual refinement, passed down through observation and imitation, produced something remarkable. Functional insulating clothing, not sewn, not tailored, but wrapped, tied, and layered in ways that genuinely trapped body heat. That trapped body heat is everything. That is the difference between surviving a cold night and dying before morning. Now let us talk about what happened next, because this is where the story becomes extraordinary. Around 50,000 years ago, something appears in the archaeological record that changes the picture completely. The needle, the bone needle, a sliver of animal bone ground to a point fine enough to pierce leather, with a hole drilled at one end for thread. This tiny object, small enough to hold between two fingers, is one of the most consequential inventions in all of human history. Before the needle, animal skin clothing was draped and tied. After the needle, it could be sewn, cut, shaped, fitted. And fitted clothing is not just more comfortable than draped skin. It is dramatically more effective at retaining body heat. A draped skin has gaps. Wind gets in. Body heat escapes. You warm the air around you instead of yourself. A sewn garment seals those gaps. It creates a microclimate against your skin. Your body warms a small pocket of air that stays warm. The cold stays outside. This is not a small difference. This is the difference between surviving -20 degrees and dying in it. And with sewn, fitted clothing, with real tailored garments, the cold parts of the world suddenly became accessible. Not comfortable, not safe, not easy, but survivable. And survivable was enough. Around 45,000 years ago, humans crossed into Europe, into a continent gripped by the last ice age, temperatures regularly dropping to levels that would kill an unprotected human in hours. They survived. Not because they evolved cold tolerance, not because they found warm caves to hide in year-round. They survived because they had learned to wear the cold-adapted animals that already lived there. Woolly mammoth, reindeer, Arctic fox, cave bear. The animals that had spent millions of years evolving insulation against the cold. Humans learned to harvest that insulation and wear it. It is one of the most elegant survival strategies in the history of life on Earth. Cannot grow fur yourself? Wear the fur of something that can. Now here is something that archaeology is only beginning to fully appreciate. The complexity of early clothing was far greater than we assumed. For a long time, the assumption was that early humans simply wrapped themselves in raw hides. Primitive, basic, barely adequate. The evidence now tells a different story. Evidence from sites in Eastern Europe and Russia dating to 30,000 to 40,000 years ago shows something remarkable. Ivory needles of extraordinary fineness, bone awls for punching holes in leather, evidence of braided thread made from plant fibers and animal tendons. And most striking, the skeletal arrangement of beads and ornaments found in burials suggests the dead were dressed in fitted, multi-piece garments. Separate leg coverings, separate upper body coverings, foot coverings that anticipated what we would call boots. These were not people wrapped in a single hide. These were people wearing constructed garments, made from multiple pieces, sewn together with real skill. The person who made those garments was a craftsperson, an expert, someone whose knowledge and skill meant the difference between a community surviving winter and not. And that expertise, that specific knowledge of how to prepare a hide, how to cut it, how to sew it, how to layer it, was among the most valuable knowledge a human community could possess. It was passed down, taught, refined across generations. This is not primitive survival, this is sophisticated technology. Now let us talk about the process, because the gap between a dead animal and a wearable garment is vast, and crossing it required an extraordinary range of knowledge and skill. The first challenge was the hide itself. A fresh hide is wet, heavy, and begins to decompose almost immediately. It will rot, it will stiffen, it will become unwearable. Ancient humans solved this through a process we now call tanning, making the hide stable and flexible enough to wear indefinitely. The oldest method of tanning we know of, and almost certainly one of the oldest technologies in human history, is brain tanning. Every animal contains in its brain almost exactly enough fat and lecithin to tan its own hide. The math of nature is precise. Ancient humans discovered this. How? Through observation, through accident, through thousands of years of trial and error. We do not know. But they discovered it, and they developed a process. Scrape the hide clean, soak the brain matter, work it into the skin by hand. The brain's oils penetrate the hide at the molecular level, binding to the collagen fibers and preventing them from sticking together as they dry. The result is soft, flexible, warm leather. Leather that does not stiffen in the cold. Leather that breathes. Leather that can be cut and sewn. This process, this knowledge, is extraordinary. It requires understanding that the brain of the animal contains something the hide needs. That is not obvious. That is the result of sustained, careful observation across many generations. Then there was the question of keeping the hide from freezing, from becoming rigid and unwearable in extreme cold. Ancient peoples in cold environments discovered that smoking a tanned hide made it water-resistant, that certain plant compounds, oak bark, birch bark, specific mosses, could be used to improve the hide's properties. This is chemistry, not labeled as such, not understood in molecular terms, but chemistry nonetheless, empirical, tested, refined across centuries. The making of clothing in the ancient world was not a simple task. It was a complex, technical process requiring knowledge of animal biology, plant chemistry, and fine manual skill. And that complexity meant that clothing production was never just individual. It was communal. It was a specialization. In ancient hunter-gatherer groups, certain individuals became known for their ability to prepare hides and make garments. This was one of the earliest human specializations. The person who could make a garment that kept the group warm through winter held knowledge that was as valuable as the person who knew where food was. Possibly more valuable, because you could go a few days without food. You could not go a night in -30 without clothing. Now here is where the story takes a turn that almost no one talks about. Animal skin clothing did not just protect ancient humans from cold, it changed them in ways that went far beyond physical survival. When you put on the skin of an animal you have killed, something happens, something that is not purely practical. Almost every ancient culture that has left us evidence, cave paintings, burial sites, shamanic objects, shows evidence of the deep symbolic relationship between humans and the animals they wore. The hunter who wore the skin of a bear was not just warm. In the mind of that hunter, in the minds of their community, they were connected to the bear. They carried something of the bear with them. The great predators of the Ice Age, the cave lion, the cave bear, the woolly mammoth, appear again and again in ancient art, not just as animals, as powers, as presences. And the humans who wore their skins were understood to share in those powers. The warmth of the mammoth, the strength of the bear, the speed of the deer. Clothing was never purely practical in the human mind. From the very beginning, it was also symbolic, also meaningful, also a statement about who you were and what you carried. This is the same impulse that drives fashion today, the same cognitive machinery. We wear things to signal power, membership, identity, aspiration. We have been doing it since a human first draped a skin over their shoulders and felt different, felt more. Now let us come to the most important consequence of animal skin clothing, the one that shaped everything that came after. It allowed humans to survive the Ice Age, and surviving the Ice Age allowed humans to populate the entire planet. When the climate warmed again, when the last great Ice Age ended around 12,000 years ago, humans were already everywhere. Europe, Asia, Australia, the Americas, every habitable continent, every ecological zone, every environment from tropical to Arctic. That global spread was made possible by animal skin, by the ability to carry warmth with you wherever you went, to make any environment survivable. No other species had ever done this. No other species has ever done this since the polar bear evolved for the Arctic. The elephant evolved for the tropics. Each animal locked into the environment it was built for. Humans evolved for one place and wore their way into every other place on Earth. That is not a small thing. That is the defining characteristic of our species, the ability to adapt not through biology, which takes thousands of generations, but through technology, which can happen in a single lifetime. And animal skin clothing was the first great expression of that ability, the proof of concept for everything that followed. Agriculture, cities, medicines, computers, space travel, all of it traces back, in some sense, to that first moment when a human looked at a dead animal and thought, I could use that. Not to eat, to wear. There is one more thing I want to tell you about animal skin clothing, a detail that I find almost unbearably moving. The oldest known example of sewn clothing in the world is not a grand garment. It is not the robe of a king or the costume of a shaman. It is a fragment of linen cloth found in Egypt, dating to approximately 5,500 years ago. Tiny, plain, almost nothing to look at. But before that, before linen, before cotton, before any plant fiber textile, there were the skins. And what the burials tell us, those Ice Age burials with their thousands of carefully arranged beads, is that the people who wore those garments were dressed with love. Someone made those clothes. Someone cut each piece. Someone pierced each hole. Someone drew the thread through each stitch. With hands that were cold, in light that was dim, under pressure that was real. Because if you got it wrong, someone you loved might freeze. And then when that person died, they were buried in what they wore, in what someone had made for them, in the thing that had kept them alive. That is not primitive. That is not simple. That is one of the most human things I can imagine, using the body of an animal to keep the person you love alive, and then sending them into death dressed in that care. The animal skin that saved the human species was never just a material. It was always also a message. I made this for you. I worked so you would not be cold. I thought of you when I was making it. We have been sending that message since before history began. We are still sending it every time someone gives a coat to someone who needs one. Every time a mother buttons up a child against the wind. Every time you reach for something warm because the night is cold. That gesture, that instinct is 170,000 years old. It was old before civilization existed, before language was fully formed, before any god had been named. It is one of the oldest human things there is, and it began with a young human crouching over a dead animal in warm Africa, looking at the skin and thinking, someone I love is cold. That thought saved us. That thought made us everything we became.